Welcome back to Narratives in Philosophy. Today we have our fourth Sidelights episode, tentatively titled Truth and Nihilism, although I think we will remove the nihilism bit. Hopefully, it depends.
We always want to remove nihilism. It's the best thing to do.
Ideally, yes. Mainly, yes, we will be talking about truth today. This stems from a book club meeting where we read effectively an article. It was a paper written by a scholar named Wolsterstorff, who enumerated various philosophical views of truth and tried to resolve them in a biblical religious sense. I think he did a good job in that context. However, it provoked thoughts. It provoked many thoughts. What is truth really? It's something that we've struggled with and dealt with. It's something we certainly have to deal with in our day-to-day lives. What's real? What is actual?
Yeah, I love these questions you have here. I'm not going to give the essay away, but there's a question. What is actually real? What is truly true?
Yeah.
I love those questions.
Yeah. So today we actually go there. It's something that many people shy away from. It's something that is very hard to grasp at. And so what I've done, I've effectively formed a novel, metaphysical approach to truth. This is on the website currently, called A Novel Approach to Metaphysical Truth. Title is pending changes, but we'll see. This episode and perhaps future episodes, we will be reading essays that we've written, or perhaps even others have written, in the beginning portion of the podcast, and I think we'll just go on to discuss it. We'll see how it goes, as we always do.
Audio essay number 1.
Here we go. A Novel Approach to Metaphysical Truth by Jacob Murdock. The issue of metaphysical truth is one of finite debate and eternal consequence. Generally, it is accepted as a colloquially philosophical question, as most people never discover the need to consider it formally. Yet, I believe that if one adopts a singular, or at least unified approach to epistemology, then they will benefit from it at many times in their life. By the very nature of understanding anything at all of metaphysics, our reflection upon our own existence is granted clarity. When it comes to the metaphysical question of truth, this benefit is especially manifest. Our very souls desire the answer here. What is actually real? What is truly true? Yet the difficulty here is also manifest. Can we even know? Truly know? Anything of metaphysics? Much less find a solution for truth itself? In this essay, I'll be developing an approach which may be used to understand a novel metaphysical conception of truth and show why it's novel. There are at least two main terms in this conversation: that of truth, or what is correct, real, actual, right, etc., and the issue of epistemology, which asks mainly how, or even if, we can know or determine truth. By the etymology of the word metaphysics, we see that it is defined by an exclusion of physics, or the natural, rather than by an inclusion of something specific. As a title to the collection of Aristotle's writings, to Metaphysica Biblia, would eventually come to be called metaphysics, the shortened form of the word itself being coined in Latin. The Greek meaning is simply the book after physics, which refers to Aristotle's tome called Physics. This context provides clarity. While it was likely his editor, Andronicus of Rhodes, who titled this metaphysics collection, Aristotle himself calls these concepts first philosophy, referring to their underlying nature in a very similar way to how we use the phrase first principles in the modern day. Likewise, the topics covered in Aristotle's metaphysics, such as being, essence, deity, the philosophy of mathematics, are all getting at those underlying causes by which existence is. While the term metaphysics has been interpreted in many ways, I will do my best to hold on to this idea that metaphysics is simply those things which are more fundamental to existence than the physical nature of the world, which is typically studied within physics, reflecting this original meaning. So, when we use the term metaphysical truth, what do we mean? Certainly, we are directly differentiating from the colloquial uses of truth when we prepend metaphysical, while obviously still getting at that particular quality of something to which we can assign the term true in a fundamental sense. It is important to begin this attempt at definition by affirming that something cannot be rightly called true unless there is some conceivable different thing of the same essence that can be called false. Already we dive headlong into the pit of metaphysical ambiguity. I will attempt to clarify what I mean by same or sameness, as this issue of sameness is also a metaphysical question, by a discrete illustration from computer science. While the world may not work in the binary states, our minds can interpret it in such modalistic ways. So I believe this illustration is properly illuminating. Imagine we have an object. For those who are familiar with programming, let's consider this in the technical object-oriented sense. Within this object, there are several attributes. Among these attributes is one called trueness, and I know this is not a word. For the sake of this essay, consider trueness to be a proper term. Additionally, we have a function within the context of this object called true, which performs some computation on the other attributes of this object and assigns a value, true or false, to this trueness attribute of the object. Already I have delineated one of my controversial views, that metaphysical truth is in fact a binary state. Yet is trueness truly an attribute for all objects? The next question to consider. For the sake of philosophical soundness, I see no reason why we cannot consider all things, even all possible permutations, combination, or composites of all things, if you prefer not to look at things in such a discretized way, as eligible candidates for this attribute. Let us leave every possible thing open for trueness, not only the common category of physical things, but also the common category of those things which are abstract. With this framework, for the concept of metaphysical truth complete, let's start with an example of an idealized situation to show the usefulness of epistemology, before properly proposing this theory of truth that I claim to have. Please imagine the scenario with me. A friend has told you something to be the case, yet another friend has told you that the opposite is true. They don't even know each other, but both claim to be first-hand observers of this truly questionable event. The event was one time and past, leaving no practically observable residue. While this scenario may seem unlikely, we can see it as a sort of archetype of a plethora of potential situations which may happen at a high frequency in our lives, wherein we must determine what is true and what is not. That is to say, if you can imagine scenarios that have at least parts in common with this described scenario, even if they are to a much, much lesser degree, then you will discover the uses of epistemology. For example, of this practicality, imagine that the friends are rather different faculties which you possess. While they may generally report reliably, and typically in corroboration with one another, they are never perfectly the same report. At a minimum, they are different in the nature of their report, be it, for example, taste and smell. From these differing reports, we may attempt to determine the truth through epistemological approaches. And this is exactly my point. We're describing an abstract way of observing the world through faculties, be them friends, words, senses, and no doubt always, in a multitude, from instant to instant. We must somehow make sense of this chaos by use of some epistemology. So, with these frameworks in mind, consider this microcosm as well. What if there was only a singular snapshot report from a singular faculty? Single faculty. What can be known from that? I assert that what can be known as truth is exclusively the data within that snapshot. Imagine an analog or lossless digital representation of this data, be it from whichever faculty. This is all that can be known. Now, assuming tachyons are literal, or more generally, a Hilbert space, which can exactly represent the current state of the universe exists, for those of you who are familiar with that level of physics, let us consider what happens when we combine the data from multiple faculties. It matters not if the faculties are discretized or composite, so long as the snapshots of data are linked to time, i.e. consecutively formed, is another way of putting it. Let's consider from the data from these multiple faculties at multiple discrete moments. And just take a minute to consider this while I quench my thirst. There you go. It's a lot.
It's a
Have a drink.
Halftime show.
Yeah. I think we're about a third.
The third time show.
Third time show. It gets real technical next.
What if that was a thing? Okay, anyway. Go on. This is good. This is good.
Yes. It's as simple as this.
Oh, that's simple. Nice.
Take it. I'm one of those freaking arrogant authors who says, "Oh, it's easy. Here's the solution."
No, this is good.
Why did I do that? The data, in order to be of use, must be combined into a composite and must be taken into some sort of repository.
Okay, that is simple.
It is fairly simple. I'm not like one of those math teachers who says, "Oh, here's the answer." Strictly speaking, this composite is like an unstructured database. Again, this is a technical computer science concept, but it's very easy to imagine this in the colloquial sense as well. Functionally, there must be some method by which data is retrieved from the composite, and mathematical operations on these data to make sense of it. Specificity is not needed here, as I do not assert that the trueness is maintained with these operations beyond the actual snapshot data itself within the composite. While trueness may be maintained into reports on the composite, it is beyond the scope of this essay to prove which operations are permitted to maintain trueness. Regardless, such operations on reports from the composite repository may be composed into what we would call information. Such information is not, strictly speaking, true beyond the trueness of those actual snapshot data from which the information was composed. While it may seem perilous to form and discretize information in this way, consider that it is fine to permit mathematical operations on this snapshot data from faculties. In effect, what we're doing is forming new snapshot data within the composite repository. For completeness, we are merely giving the opportunity for interactions between snapshot data to occur, and the results to thereby be included in this composite repository. Well, we could imagine some infinite composite repository which includes every possible interaction between data. This is also not necessary, since the very conception of the composite repository is in fact a practical one, a necessary structure by which multiple discrete snapshots can be combined into what we know as information. Both the snapshot data and information as described above is possible to be known, but very impractical for the human mind. The above description does not take into account the absurdity, which is the process by which our mind actually receives data from our faculties, stores it, and recalls it. While it is doubtless true that this process is lossy, we need not consider such realities in our philosophical discussion. In other words, metaphysical truth can only exist in flawless composites which receive data from flawless faculties. I say this, that what is true is merely the data and information which is described above. The notion of resolving the original thought experiment is merely that of stating that the reports from different friends are in fact both true, and that they both reported whatever it is that they reported. The reality of the event is unknowable by you, given the information presented. You merely desired an answer of trueness at a level that was unattainable. So then, what remains is to consider the concept of truth and reality. I do indeed believe that there is such a thing as reality. I do not believe that it can be quote-unquote truly known. As I showed above, I believe that our observations, or rather reports from faculties, can be known, and even then, in the human case of flawed faculties, composite repositories, and retrieval from such composites, the case is hopeless. We are separated by several degrees from truth. At best, when a sufficient amount of these reports correspond, we call it reality with some certainty. Until that occurs, we are in full doubt. It is just that simple. In summary, the reports are true, reality is true. Both are practically impossible to know. By faith, we may be granted beliefs of reality which we have not had reports of. This is almost a side comment to comment on faith, but moving on. Epistemology, then, is the process by which we understand reality based on these reports in light of our flawed condition. My process is straightforward. Believe nothing except by faith, but act in accordance with the most likely report of reality based on information formed from my composite. Now, let's review various historical approaches to this topic. There are various approaches which do not at all approximate my own above description. For instance, the Correspondence theory of truth addresses the idea of true and false statements, as whether or not they correspond to reality. I do not see it as sensible to conceive of truth at this level, as you may already have figured out. A statement is unlikely to precisely correspond to the data which I described above as true, much less with reality itself. Furthermore, it assumes that words have data-like meaning. This obvious absurdity causes me to move on without regret. The Coherence theory asserts that a statement is true within the context that it coheres within. Again, we have words with exact literal meaning, and a difficulty in correspondence with reality. To be fair, both of these methods are attempting to take an approach which is at a higher level of abstraction than my own. I think this is why they directly fail. I will say that this theory is important in the context of systems of belief. We all want to be consistent, unified people who do not hold contradictory beliefs, after all. So then, in my construction, a proper reading of the composite takes into account all beliefs simultaneously, making sure that none of them are contradictory and that each belief is based off of the same information. If we did have contradictory accounts, that would be reflective of flaws in some human flaw there. Again, I think this is more of a frivolous side point or something that could lead to more study. There are various more complicated views of truth based on the above two, which add additional categories, descriptors, or contexts to the notions of truth. They are frankly dizzying and typically pragmatic and heuristic in nature. For the concept of metaphysical truth, they are totally lacking, and I don't see the need to list all of them here as they're simply alterations on the previous two. Next, there are various sorts of approaches to truth which are based on symbolic, mathematics, and logic. These approaches fall short in the same way as above, in that there are dubious connections between these symbols and reality, just as there are dubious connections between words and reality. The way that these theories get around this connectivity issue is by calling these symbols, words, or sentences, which are sometimes taken as the appropriate unit for carrying truth, fully interpreted. This notion provides exact meaning to words. However, none contest the reality that there may be different correct interpretations depending on context. To get around even this problem, they call these sentences eternal sentences, which means that they have transcendent meaning regardless of context. From my perspective, this removes all potential for practicality from their theories. While attesting that they can find truthfulness in words, they divorce words from their fundamental nature. They're talking about symbols, which mean nothing or mean arbitrary things. This problem has no parallel in my above lower level approach. Yet another approach is that of realism and anti-realism. These approaches describe our own interaction with the world around us. Specifically, realism claims that we may think true or false thoughts about the world. Again, I believe the issue of symbolism, not reflecting reality, happens here, since we tend to think in words, or at least symbols of some sort. This theory is slightly comparable with my own formulation, but rather than limiting truthfulness to the actual snapshot data as I do, which is impractical to hold in our minds, as I pointed out, they assert that our thoughts themselves can be true or false in reference to the world. Further notions of verification occur with anti-realism, which, once again, has no direct correspondence with reality. If it's not clear, my problem with this theory is that, due to the impreciseness of thoughts, the separation from those and the actual data that we absorb, that is where the error arises. Lastly, in this section, I will mention deflationism, which is primarily a construction against those correspondence theories. This is the method by which we remove metaphysical aspects from the notion of truth. However, this approach still takes sentences or predicates as those truth-carrying units. In essence, deflationism merely asserts that these truth-carrying units are not actually true, nor are they actually false. I don't really understand this emphasis, since I have already disposed with the correspondence theory in a different way. In a way, I suppose I can agree with it, or rather, maybe I would say the opposite. Predicates and sentences can be taken as data, which is true. They exist in their context and can be decomposed into data as described in my model. This leads me directly to my last point. What is language exactly? Words are, truly, data. Like other reports in my theory, they may be integrated into the composite of information. Their place in the composite differs according to their context. There's really no need for further explanation concerning language.
There was, as our previous 3 episodes showed.
Well,
But this is very good.
that is
I
the
like
conclusion
this.
of my essay.
This is a well-written essay. It's very good. The reason it's good is because I think you put on page the problem. The solution, I feel like you're giving a solution that is a description, describing it more simply. And I don't know what your final fulfillment is yet, but let's let me just put it in my own words. Something we do in class
Sure.
is I will ask a student to put it in their own words to see if they understand.
I'm curious.
So I'm about to put this in my own words, and you tell me if I need to try again.
I will listen.
Tell me if I need to try again. So, in simple sentences, I think that you are saying there is an ideal truth. It exists. But because of perception and because of language, we will never be able to state it or understand it perfectly.
When you say an ideal truth, I feel like you're referring to something
Something that exists.
limited.
Something that exists and determines what is true or false.
I spent some time discussing metaphysical truth at the beginning of the essay. I was trying to get at this idea, by calling it metaphysical, that it is something that undergirds reality itself. And so what I'm trying to convey by metaphysical truth and defining it in the way I did is that things are actual. They
Okay.
really do exist.
Well, let me try again.
Sure.
So you are saying that existence exists,
Mm-hmm.
and existence.
I'm describing the relationship between us and reality.
Let me try. Existence exists, and there is a real existence. There is a plane that is objective. But the only thing we have of that is data. And because our mind will instantly create information from that data, we cannot necessarily say that we know the truth.
That's correct.
Okay.
We have created images of the truth in our minds.
It's so interesting because yet again, you're just doing a Platonic cognitive framework. At the very top,
It's true, yeah.
you've got
In some ways, at least.
the necessary existent. Then below that, you've got mathematics or the ideal forms. So maybe when we're forming comprehension of something, we're interacting with something that is an ideal form. But we can only interact with that ideal form with images. Words, numbers, figures, scribbles on paper. And what you're claiming is that the images themselves on paper cannot be true. So we've got an ideal form. So maybe the ideal quality of justice. We know that some sort of perfect justice exists. We know what injustice looks like.
Yeah,
but
so that's
we
an
can't-
abstract idea,
Yeah.
which is included in
Can't
my
really
conception.
say what justice looks like, but we know it probably exists. We know what injustice looks like. We can write about justice, but again, the words aren't necessarily true. They're just pictures of the thing that is actually true, which is the ideal concept of justice.
So I haven't exactly worked in the unified line framework before when it comes to this idea of truth, but it might help shine some light on what I'm getting at. If we go down this list, we have ideal forms, mathematical model, observable things, and images. Those are the 4 levels that we're talking about.
Yeah.
So if we talked about a rock, to make it just really simple here, not an abstract idea, but something physical, the ideal form of this rock is actually just the actual rock. Okay?
That's exactly what I think you're saying.
Yes. The mathematical model of this rock is the exact data that you could use to reconstruct the rock exactly. So it's a set of data that fully describes this rock from every conceivable way of thinking. If we think about it in physics terms, it would have to be an atomic or perhaps even subatomic description of every interaction going on between the pieces of this rock.
The image of the rock that is observed to our mind's eye, so to speak,
So we'll get there, yeah.
is not the real rock.
The
true rock.
The observable things is where we go to faculties, when I start talking about faculties. So what we have is observable things, that snapshot data like I talked about, that snapshot is the observable things level. This is the second row of this unified line framework. When we put together lots of this snapshot data, as I imagine is actually going on in reality, and bring them into this composite like I talked about in our flawed human minds, in our human case, we still just have observable things. We're still at that observable level. If we go down to that first row, I think what we have is a retelling. We have the words that describe the data in our head.
Ode to the rock. A poetic ode.
Just now?
No, I'm just saying, if I wrote a poetic ode to the rock, a poem dedicated to the rock,
I was thinking, if you try and describe the rock to someone else, you're making an image of the observable things, the data that's in your head, of the mathematical model of the rock, which is kind of the ideal form, of the actual rock, which is really the ideal form.
Okay, well, this is interesting. What this now shows me is that this is not necessarily talking about truth in the sense that I'm trying to talk to you about. This is merely talking about data.
This is talking about metaphysical truth, which is something that undergirds reality. It is not talking about words. When I say at the end of the essay, we have no more need to talk about words, what I'm actually saying is, in terms of metaphysical truth, we don't need to think about words in that level of colloquial truth. There's a different conversation there.
Okay. So what do you think your audience should do with this knowledge?
I think that this essay is an accurate metaphysical representation of reality. I'm bold enough to say that. When we read metaphysics, be it from Aristotle or others, we see their descriptions of reality in various weird ways.
Yeah.
This description of reality is actually informed by physics and information theory and, frankly, just computer science, a whole bunch of logical scientific frameworks. And it also is the preconditions here, the presumptions behind this theory is actually really simple. It's that reality is real. Not only that, reality is true. So the physical things that exist, even the abstract things that we talk about, they are real, fundamentally true things. Metaphysically true is what I should say. So that's really the only assumption. So if you were to listen to this essay, think, okay, this makes sense.
I do.
I would hope that you leave this and have a right view of the world, a grounded view of reality. This combats several things, including nihilism.
All right.
One of the things that can lead to nihilism, because we were going to call this Truth and Nihilism episode, perhaps we still will, is the concept that reality isn't real. Let's take the movie Inception as a very easy way to delve into this topic. at what level of their dream state is real? Are all of them real? Are they equally real? Did the top keep spinning or did it fall over? For those of you who remember the end of the movie.
Great movie.
And literally I had my wife asking, did it keep spinning? Like, what happened? And
Yeah, some people are like, why would they do that?
I'm just like,
why would they do that?
I'm like face palming because like you miss the point. Like that is actually what they want you to ask. They want you to question reality itself.
And that was something that I remember when I was in 8th grade made me one of the most nihilistic, depressed people ever. I hated that movie in middle school. I love it now because I feel very grounded in the fact that you can question as much as you want whether something is a dream or whether you were created by aliens.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is the framework of the Matrix is the framework of the Matrix.
Yeah.
You can't go out from it.
So it says something in that respect and also doesn't say much because, like I said, I am starting from a point that says reality's real. This is the definition of truth. But let's take solace in that because we can know that it is, in fact, our definition of truth.
So,
as you said, the Matrix is real. That is our reality.
Try to do some misinterpretations on purpose.
Okay. That's mean.
I'm going to do some misinterpretations on purpose.
I'll kick back and listen.
Let's see. So you said... let's just slice and dice here for a second. Okay. Metaphysical truth can only exist in flawless composites which receive data from flawless faculties. My bad translation. Specifically trying to misinterpret you.
All right.
If that's the case, that means everybody can do, say, and believe whatever they want.
That's so non sequitur.
Because no one has flawless faculties. No one has flawless composites.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, there is no ability to know anything. So I can go do whatever I want to do. Because there's nothing to be known. The eternal attributes, can't know those. Cannot know them. Not knowable, so I can go do whatever I want to do. God probably doesn't exist, because why would he create a world that is so unknowable and ethereal?
Alright, so I actually do a bit of addressing of this when I discuss epistemology and what my epistemology is. It was a very brief paragraph right there in the middle of the essay. Let me see if I can find it.
Is it where you say, yes, it's as simple as this?
Alright, here we go. By faith we may be granted beliefs of reality which we have not had reports of.
And you mean report there, I'm going to misinterpret it again. You mean that we can have never heard of something through words, but believe it exists, but that's a misinterpretation. What you're actually saying is the faculties don't give us
actual
reports.
Observations, yes.
Okay.
I'm effectively defining faith as in the normal sense. Which
is that the faculties don't report of it. Okay.
Yeah. So then my process is straightforward. Believe nothing. So truly believe nothing except by faith. But act in accordance with the most likely reality based on the information formed from your composite.
So there's a difference between another misinterpretation.
Yeah.
Is there a difference between belief and faith? Does that sentence seem to paint a dividing line between...
Well, believe nothing except by faith. So in my framework, in my epistemology, I'm choosing... There is a difference between belief and faith. You can believe things, I think, outside of faith. You might just be ungrounded. In my framework, in fact, you have to be ungrounded because we acknowledge the flawed human condition.
Or as Kierkegaard said, you could go beyond faith and believe it because there's evidence. So I should believe it because there's evidence.
See, I say don't believe it because there's evidence. The evidence is not sufficient for your actual belief. Now, you can act in accordance with the evidence.
Okay.
And I'm drawing where the difference here is, where the weirdness here is that I'm saying belief is not the same as acting in accordance with. Whereas most people say you act according to your beliefs.
I totally agree with that.
So there's a bit of difference there in definitions from what's normal.
That's the whole opposite discussion we had, truth and certainty.
Yes. So what I'm saying is only be certain of what you take by faith. And it's an intrinsic necessity when it comes to this sort of metaphysical truth concept, because what I'm acknowledging is because we cannot actually know anything for certain. Even though there is certainty, I've shown there is absolute certainty in reality, we can't actually know it because of our flawed human state. We're not perfect computers, perfect composites. We don't have perfect faculties, etc.
Yeah, I totally agree with all this. So another misinterpretation. Because of the flawed state of the faculties, because of the flawed state of the impressions, if you want to use a Hume term, because of our flawed reasoning.
Right.
Words are so pathetic that they should rarely be used.
Okay, so for that and the previous misinterpretation, the sentence here, act in accordance with the most likely report of reality based on the information from your composite. That is the right answer. We don't have anything better to go on than our composite. We don't have any better images to use than our words. Okay?
Yeah, I mean,
it is the best tool for the job, fundamentally.
I'll tell you, and you haven't read this yet, and I won't give away too much, that is the essential question the preacher asks right when the kingdom is on the cusp of rebellion. He gets up on his perch and he says, you've removed all systems of authority. You've removed all guiding stones.
Yep.
There's no longer king. There's no longer country. We don't even have an oracle anymore to decide anything. Who's to decide whether this man's works are from God? Because he's doing all these miracles.
Yeah.
Right? You should just believe him because he's powerful. Believe the thing you see in front of you. Seeing is believing, right?
Yeah.
But then he says, no, this will damn you if you follow this man. He's a man. The work he's doing is not of God. So that's one thing that's interesting, is you can't necessarily believe on a system of authority that is right in front of you.
That's exactly it. I'm saying don't believe, just act in accordance with it. It's your best option outside of faith, outside of actual belief.
Well,
but go on.
You are still saying faith is enough. Like faith is okay, misinterpretation number 5.
Sure. So what you're saying is
that faith is not necessary. Is that true?
Okay.
I'm just trying to determine what you're saying.
Absolutely.
By saying what you're not saying.
If you don't want to believe anything at all, faith is completely unnecessary. But as we discussed in our last episode,
not really possible to do that. Right?
You're going to have a flawed narrative framework if you don't believe anything at all. Your final fulfillment will be lacking if you don't believe anything at all.
Purposelessness.
Yeah.
So faith is necessary.
Faith is
a necessary part in that.
Faith is certainly necessary for a good narrative framework, we'll say.
And to be saved.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. In a Christian sense.
Absolutely.
And folks, anytime we're talking about metaphysical truth, it's going to be impossible to not talk about religion. We're in the same ballpark. So, okay, so those are some misinterpretations. I have another question I want to ask, but the thing that is so interesting to me about this is that essentially what you're doing is you're just adding the discretized complexity to simple creedal statements.
Yeah.
So like a creedal statement would be faith is a necessity. So sola fide. The old Protestant ethics, sola fide. I don't see anything about this that does not deeply undergird and require sola fide.
So this paper, this essay, is written in a response to me reading and me understanding the current philosophical statements of truth. I read them, I thought about them, I found them insufficient, and so I decided, well, let's coin a term, metaphysical truth, and work towards defining that.
Okay.
So yes, it's not more fundamental than a very simple statement, faith is necessary, but at the same time, it's for a different audience.
Okay. Interesting. So, it's interesting because what this does is it's almost a double-edged sword. It goes against the crowd that wants to prove everything and be certain of everything.
Yeah.
And it also goes against the crowd that I have so many numerous problems with that is like, hey, life is what it is, man.
Yeah.
You you got what you believe, man, our words are just kind of tools. They just float around in the ether. There's really nothing to them. And you don't have to engage with anybody's claims because that's just their opinion, man. So I like this because it kind of cuts both ways.
It does. It absolutely does.
Okay. Because you have to communicate because there is some sort of real reality.
Yeah.
Words
are images of that real reality. They're instantiated images.
To some extent. So you need to engage. You need to engage and try to figure this out. You can't just say, oh, I'm fine here in my bubble. And then on the other end, you can't be, I have proven everything, like Aquinas.
Yeah, you can't.
I'm going to write about everything and prove it all.
Or like Hume, where it's like, this is human. This is what it means to be human. You have these attributes. That's it. It's like, no, like, you can't prove that. That's based on your observations, which are, it's built on information that is flawed because it goes into your head and it's not accurate and full. And besides that, you didn't even get the whole picture. You're missing pieces of information. You've not had your faculties observe everything that's possible to observe. And your reasoning is insufficient to then compose that into a singular, framework.
Mm.
So there's a lot of,
And what's intriguing is that everyone, just like my heuristic, won't be able to help but live through this model. They're interacting with a real reality, and their words may or may not reflect what the reality is. This is something we discussed off the record.
Mm.
That's it. They're always appealing to some sort of authority.
Oh, yes.
And it seems to be outside of themselves.
Yeah.
So it's almost like Hume appeals to the human person and all of the processes and the machine. Religious people appeal to all sorts of things. Like we mentioned, sola scriptura or ex cathedra, words from the Pope.
Yeah.
But I don't see anybody in here not appealing to authority to help establish their data into information. Is there anybody who just appeals to themselves and say, I saw it, so it's the case? I mean, I guess you could. Eyewitness accounts. I saw this, so it is the case. So that is an appeal to, eyewitness viewing of an event.
In your framework, you are appealing to the authority of your faculties.
Okay.
So it's still there. The authority figure is still there. And as I pointed out, your faculties themselves may be flawed, just like any authority figure that you're pointing to may be flawed.
Okay. We need to think of a situation to apply this. So
it's not even
for the sake of funness.
Okay.
I'm gonna go there.
It's not so much applicational.
I'm gonna go there.
But you can.
No.
I'm ready.
Okay. How do I say this? The Bible is a flawed composite, just like any other flawed composite. To me, I interpret that as saying, okay, you don't believe in infallibility.
Mm.
Great. Fine. There were clerical errors. Okay. Great. But the inerrancy of the document in everything it teaches, I don't see that as a flawed composite.
So you can actually take the epistemology I suggest here and apply it. Inerrancy states in the original manuscripts. This is a point of Christian doctrine for our listeners. In the original manuscripts, there are no errors. There's nothing that's fallible. And there's been various ways that this has been reinterpreted. Infallibility, being kind of a permutation there. All of it stems from authority, i.e., the Spirit spoke these words through these prophets and individuals, and they are thereby God's actual words. Yeah. And there's some other words that go along with the doctrine there we don't really need to get into. The point is, we in the modern day can view this book as, yes, a flawed composite if in no other way that it's not the original manuscript. We're never going to have that.
Yeah, I mean, you don't
and even if we did, we wouldn't read the
Jesus
language in the same way that the authors
in
did.
front of you talking to you.
And so what we have is a situation where we have epistemology. If you want to believe the Bible, you do it by faith. Because I say believe nothing except by faith. This is me holding very loosely onto everything except those few key things, which I hold on to by faith.
Okay. Yeah, this is very interesting. I guess the problem that I'm seeing is just that the way I see people use this kind of methodology in the circles we run in tends to look something like not needing to ever change their mind about anything ever, because there's no...
What do you mean use this methodology? Use my methodology?
Not use it, but speak to it, perhaps. There is no real reality except outside of their perception. So they take... Okay, here's what it is. They take the composite they form as the real reality.
They believe their own composite.
Yeah, they believe
absolutely.
their composite.
This is prevalent and pervasive, yes.
Or they don't believe in the concept of a real reality.
I think their epistemology is flawed because they have failed to acknowledge that metaphysical truth, actual reality, is not something that they can hold exactly within their own minds, within their own composites.
Okay.
And so for them to believe in that is an epistemological error. They have found their source of truth there in their minds and failed to realize a number of flaws occur when they've put it in their minds, when they reason about it in their minds. If nothing else, they don't have the whole picture.
And they're having faith in their reason to prove it to themselves.
Imagine making a statement, pick any controversial statement. We'll pick a rough one. Fetuses are humans.
Yeah.
Imagine saying that out loud. Making a statement. Imagine believing that.
Yeah.
Why do you believe that? There's a list of things in your head that you have reasoned about to come to this new data point. This new, what do I even call it, my text, this new report in your head.
Yeah.
That says, that puts these words together and makes this belief a thing in your head. Well, it doesn't make that belief a thing. It makes that data a thing.
Sure.
When you then look in your head and find that idea, you say, oh, I believe this fully. You're making an epistemological error because you have failed to acknowledge that you don't have the whole picture. You don't actually know fully what it is to be a human. You don't actually know unless you're taking certain things by faith. If you're using my epistemological framework anyways, you're either taking things by faith and then, okay, I grant that. At that point I say, okay, you believe that. You know, I would believe those things by faith. You know, maybe I believe different things by faith. Anyways. But the point is, by faith, it's weird because you're also acknowledging that there is a logical jump. As soon as you say by faith, you spin it differently. You hold on to it differently. If I were to say by faith I believe a fetus is a human, I would be saying it a lot differently. I wouldn't be trying to prove something or shove something down your throat because I don't expect other people to arbitrarily just have the same faith that I do.
It's a difficult example because there's enough data in that situation.
You think there is. There's enough data in the situation to say, this is a desk. I don't believe it. I don't.
Because it's a desk, you don't need to believe it.
I act as if it's true. I act as if it's true. There's a difference.
It is a desk, though. You don't need to believe it is. It is a desk.
I act as if this is a desk.
It is a desk.
So I am now delineating the very awkward line of definitions between belief and act because there really isn't the proper words there.
In the whole situation with the fetus, if we're going to use that example, we know when fetal heart rate starts. We know all these things. I mean, it's very difficult to make the statement to the contrary. So, same way we get up to the existential beyond and make that gap.
Well, I'm not saying you can make the statement either way. I'm saying exactly you can't make the statement either way, except by faith.
Okay, great.
You can't make any statement anyway except by faith.
How does that help anyone? Because here's the deal.
Yeah.
The whole point here is we want people to change their mind from murdering humans to not murdering humans.
Sure.
Now, whether you agree it is a human or not, the question at stake here is if this is a human and we abort the fetus,
It's difficult, yeah.
the human is killed. So this is not a simple parlor room discussion anymore. You've made it real. So now, how do you apply your thing?
Okay.
Because the ideal here is we want to prevent humans from dying if, in fact, this is a human.
Sounds good.
So how do we do that?
In this particular case,
I don't think this is a mystery hidden in the mind of God. We can...
It's not... Well, I used the example to open a can of worms, not so that I could share my own... Not so that I could show my own view on it, because, like I've already said, I acknowledge it by faith that...
I think it goes back to something we had
now,
earlier in the podcasting today. We scientifically can go beyond ourselves to some extent through reasoning, through logic, through science. We can go beyond ourselves, and we can make that gap, that leap of faith...
I was kind of going to get there.
...somewhat smaller, perhaps.
Is there sufficient reason in your composite to act as if something is true? When it comes to that case...
That's how you maybe discuss this
yes.
in the public spheres. You say, hey,
yes.
What are your reasons?
You're absolutely right.
The problem I see is that people shut down debate with this kind of thinking. This is good thinking. But people use it, like we discussed. Hopefully, if they interpret this correctly, it cuts against the people who are certain and the people who are shutting down discussion.
Okay. I see where you're going. I think this is right.
I hope that it shuts down the people who are shutting down discussion, because if there is a real reality, then that means that moral blunders of a significant level are possible.
Yes.
So that just became real to me, that there is a real reality. The potential for supreme moral failure is all of a sudden possible. That's very interesting and very terrifying. And it just makes it important to not just be casual about throwing around assertions that, oh, that isn't a human. Okay, let's look at the composite reasons here.
Yep. I will admit the implications from this framework are greater than what I've considered until now. So you've kind of caught me,
that's fine.
In genuine conversation, of course.
This is all stuff we'll continue to consider. I think the framework holds true, especially considering it cuts against both sides of the aisle. I think that's very helpful.
Yeah. You've just taken it places I haven't necessarily thought through before. So, but this is
good
fine.
Stuff.
Yeah.
Another example where we could apply this. Words. I know you said that was sufficiently spoken to. Well, what were your exact words? There is no need for further explanation concerning language. I know you've explained this. You explained why.
It's effectively an ironic sentence, just to be fair.
So words are data, though.
I ended it on irony, but yes,
I love that you say words are truly data.
I tried to include the word true and truly
I
in
love
all this
that.
as many times as possible.
I didn't notice it until you delivered it verbally. And
yes,
it was so funny.
when I emphasized.
Truly, truly, I say unto you. I love that is the beginning of his words.
Yeah.
Truly, truly, I say unto you.
He is speaking reality.
And then Peter goes on to say, we were not cleverly devising fables. We were eyewitnesses of his majesty. So we're supposed to believe
They've
that
received
Peter
it
has received it and written it down.
into their composites in ways that they have sufficient reason to act as if it's true. And then beyond that, they have faith to really believe it.
Oh yeah, because obviously there were people who saw these works and did not believe.
Yeah. They had sufficient reason in their composite to believe. You see, miracle. You probably should act as that guy is the son of God or whatever he says he is.
Your composite and,
yeah.
Put that in your pipe and smoke it, so to speak.
Try and reason about that a bit, figure out what you're going to do in response to that.
That's good.
But then, beyond that, you actually have to really believe that by faith in order to change your life
because you can see what appears to be data and do weird random things with the data.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. But I love that you say words are data, because that then makes it important to engage with authority. And I'm using authority and data interchangeably.
Okay.
Because I feel like if something is data point, and it is a real telling of a real reality, it is in my best interest to comprehend what that data point is saying. I might not do it fully perfectly because I'm a flawed human.
Yeah, that's true.
But there are things I can get perfectly.
A word comes through a faculty. It goes into the composite, in spoken sense, through a series of the snapshot data through the ear. The actual physical ear.
Yeah.
That snapshot data is comprised into a unit of information, which is the word in this case, or the sentence. Well, probably the word and then a higher order of the sentence. And then that word is then an abstract idea in your mind, stored imperfectly because you don't remember the precise snapshot data, every waveform,
Or maybe the word itself was not invented well enough to describe the physical thing it was trying to
Exactly.
describe.
And in the abstract sense, you're also having flaws introduced because you might think that word is, one meaning, one connotation. But that word is actually stored in the composite, and it should be recalled in association with all of the context around this word. Okay. It should be recalled in the context of its sentence, of its speaker, of the language that it's spoken in, of the everything, of the world, the year, the time.
So this is good.
This is how I form information from words.
I can all agree with this. But then, Book of Romans, the Holy Spirit intercedes for us in our weaknesses and groanings too deep for words.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a sense to where there is an ideal, and I think we touched on this in previous episodes, and I think it's in the narrative, the meta-narrative. You don't necessarily need a word to describe the feltness of the presence of a deep problem with humanity, the longing for a solution, and the hope of a final fulfillment. You feel a lack of love in your life, you hope for a solution, and you have faith in a final fulfillment. And those three things you don't need words to describe. Those things can transcend words.
Yeah.
So,
if we take it back to the unified line, the cognitive framework, since words are on that first rung, images, groanings too deep for words means you are experiencing things above that first framework.
Yeah.
Either on the second rung or the third rung even maybe. But yes, beyond words, absolutely.
When that happens, we're now beyond data. Because there's no words of that, there's no recorded experience of it in our faculties. I mean, reasoning, can you really reason about this deep sense of pain, sorrow, world grief, a grief at the world that's been given to you? When if you're a Jewish person in an internment camp, you have no reason why these people are doing these terrible things. You have no words to describe the awful things they're doing to you. You have no data to make sense of any of it. So I think this is really the crux of the matter, is that the system breaks down at the point where words as data points are no longer usable. Because words can speak of these physical experiences, even maybe of spiritual experiences to some extent, but then there's a point where it's just like, we go beyond that. What is that?
Well, I don't know. It's not metaphysical truth in the sense that I mean it.
No.
It may be real. I think if I were to try and work towards that, I would have to come up with a different term. I think that term would be transcendent truth. But it's hard because metaphysical truth is so granular. It's impossibly small.
Okay, yeah. It's not trying to make these massive sweeping claims to the human condition.
It's not like, you can't make statements about God with metaphysical truth. We'll say that out loud.
Okay,
Just
okay.
try and clear the floor a bit.
That's cool.
You're getting at things transcendent. Metaphysical truth doesn't talk to those things, unfortunately. Metaphysical, the word itself here, we're talking beyond physics. While it does have a connotation of spiritual, it's actually below physical.
Okay.
It's not above physical, it's below physical in this sense. And I'm trying to get at the original meaning of that word from Aristotle here when I use it. So
that makes a lot more...
I mean, I want to go there with you. I can't.
Well, it's
not
a
with
good
metaphysical
delineation
truth.
because a lot of people, myself included, were taking this and saying, okay, experiences of the above realms are nothing, and they're probably my mind leading me astray.
I think they can be... They are just as any faculty makes observations. We could say something like the human has a faculty of the spirit, if you want to go there in the Christian sense. And this faculty of the spirit does have some mysterious interaction with the person that we experience as physical.
Okay.
And in that sense, there are certainly some data that is accepted, or that is metaphysically true from this. Metaphysical truth kind of transcends the spirit because it would undergird the reality of that spirit as well as the reality of the finite realm. So it kind of can go there, but it's limited in this conception because I tried to write this paper in a way that relates it back to our human experience, right?
Okay.
And because of our human experience and this unnecessary from a philosophical standpoint, but necessary from a practical standpoint of the composite, the repository I spoke of, technically that's not even necessary. Metaphysical truth is true without it going into the composite. It's just we can't receive it without a composite.
Okay.
You see that?
Yeah.
And so if the spirit and the faculty which is the spirit between us is not the sort of faculty that communicates with the composite of our minds, then it's not going to go into the composite of our minds.
Okay, well, we might have gotten this, or I might have made this thoroughly back-asswards.
I appreciate where you've gone with it. And
I have attempted to take it and apply it as much as possible to as many things as possible. You gave a great example of the abortive situation. I think that's still a good example to apply this.
And we can go through that again if you'd like.
Well,
or not.
It was a good example.
Okay.
And the example of spiritual realms, it's good to know that you cannot equate spiritual things and metaphysical things. That's good to know.
Yeah, and I think it is an important delineation. You bring up a really good point, because the metaphysical truth may be, it is true regardless of its interaction with you or your composite or your mind. It is there. It is real, regardless of whether you can perceive it or not, regardless of whether you have a faculty to receive that into your composite or not.
And we know that typically when people are interacting with it, the process looks something like going and going and going and then getting to that existential beyond and using that if-then-else to make that final leap. So something like that.
Yeah, faith. Like I said, believe nothing but by faith. That is my epistemology.
If that's the case, can we do this if-then-else probability schematic?
We can, in my epistemology, we act as if it's true all the way up until that point. And I'm drawing a very fine line between belief and acting as if something is true. Very fine line.
Okay.
Basically, I'm equivocating belief and faith, and then not having a word that colloquially means belief. Hopefully our listeners can follow along with my twisting and perverting of language.
I apologize if I have made a mess of this, folks, but we're just trying to understand these very deep and interesting ideas. The only problem I have is the way people use stuff like this, and I don't think you're doing this at all, but it's so easy to use this in the deflationary thing that you close with.
Yeah.
You know.
Well,
Yeah.
and let me delineate a little bit more about the deflationary truth theory.
Sure.
What they are saying, you know how one of the beginning statements of this is, let's imagine that there are objects and each object has a field called trueness or something like that.
Yeah.
Deflationary says, no, objects don't have a trueness field. That's absurd.
Huh.
So I am very different from the deflationary theory because I say, yes, literally everything has a trueness factor to it. No, if it's abstract, if it's real, no matter what level on the cognitive framework it is, trueness has to be an attribute of everything.
Do you
Whether
mean
it's
that
composite.
truly?
I don't know. Yeah, so...
It's good. It's
yeah.
good. So truly, folks, today we have truly
There's one...
messed with your brain.
I hope so. There's one other thing I would like to take this back to. A couple episodes ago, we talked about the book club. We talked about trying to find a foundation on which we could all come to agree together, and thereby, want to move forward because we have that same foundation. Does this help with that at all? Is this something that we can consider in that light?
I think what it seems to do is show us that it's possible for everybody to get into the same ballpark, and that is something we should try to do. Instead of merely saying, Jacob's going to think what he's going to think, Stephen's going to think what he's going to think, and everybody else is going to think what they're going to think. Define your terms.
Yeah.
Reason through it. Use what data points you have in your composite.
Yeah, share your
Compare
composites
them.
with one another.
Yeah, share your composites. Why do you think what you think?
Yeah.
And
Why,
then-
well, it's not even that. Why do you act the way you act?
Yeah.
In my epistemology, it's not belief; it's acting, and so you have reasons for that. I acknowledge those reasons. Share those reasons with other people, and hopefully, if they reciprocate, then you'll have the same basis for behavior and be able to act in harmony. That's the idea here.
Yeah. And I think that your essay holds to the necessitude of finding that harmony for concerted behavior. I appreciate that. I appreciate the fact that it agrees to a real reality. We'll talk about Nietzsche next time, because he has some interesting ideas on that. I do not think this is by any means an assassination of everything but perception. It's almost like you're saying perception is helpful to a point.
Perception will never take the place of faith.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what
But
I'm
it's
saying.
helpful to a point. There is a place for deliberation. There is a place for exploration.
Yes.
There is a place for rigorous study and contending with nature, if you want to put it in the Baconian sense.
Yeah.
Contending with the seat of nature for answers. Well, folks, thank you for exploring these issues with us. We hope you are not too significantly depressed from our discussion today.
No, never.
Go and contend with nature and contend with your life.
And feel free,
find answers.
This essay is on the website. If you have any questions, comments, feel free, leave a comment under the post. We will get back to you. Thank you for coming along with us in this episode of Narratives in Philosophy. Signing out.